On today's episode, we talk about why you might want to consider downsizing your baits in the fall, and then we give you 3 specific baits to consider, including brand, size, price, and all of the details. We also cover rod choices for wading, how to dress appropriately for fall fishing, and where river fish tend to move at the end of summer and into early autumn. All that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors, Mossy Oak, and Dakota Lithium.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk Podcast. We do have a great show for you today, but first, we would have no show without the boys over at American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. American Legacy Fishing is my favorite place to shop for rods, reels, line, baits, whatever I need to go fishing. But even better, right now, they have their Labor Day sale still going on if you are listening to this episode on the day that it comes out, September 3rd. If you're listening to it on Tuesday, you are in luck because for the next, 12, 16 hours, however long you've got from the time that you're listening to this until midnight, the Labor Day sales are still active on the AmericanLegacyFishing.com webpage. So they end on 9/3 at midnight. So if you're listening early, you can still get in on these. They have 25% off all Dobbins rods. They also have 20% off all used gear. They have 25% off all Fenwick rods, and they have 35% off of all Berkeley baits. All of that and more going on right now over at AmericanLegacyFishing.com with the 2024 Labor Day sale. And if what you're looking for is not on sale, you're still going to save 10% by using code TACKLETALK10. Tackle Talk 10 saves you 10% off almost everything on the website that's not already on sale or not one of the exclusions. Again, a great Midwestern company right there in southern Indiana that is ready to take care of you for all the best fishing gear on the planet. Again, www.americanlegacyfishing.com. Check out the Labor Day sales and be sure to use code TACKLETALK10. All right, everybody, the first thing we have here today, I know I talked a few weeks ago about pro fishing being done for the year, and that is true for the 2 main circuits, Major League Fishing and the Bassmaster Elite Series, in terms of traditional competition at the highest level with regular tournament events. It is. It's done for the year. But that doesn't mean that there's no entertaining or worthwhile fishing happening out there in the world from now until the beginning of spring. There is. There's still things going on, and this past week we had one of those additional events that's at least worth mentioning here. So Major League Fishing kicked off the Challenge Cup in Erie, Pennsylvania from August 25th through 30th, which is one of 4 events that they're hosting this fall featuring BPT anglers competing against each other in 2-man teams. Now, the nice part is that with this event, all 6 days were live streamed for free on Major League Fishing's website versus the regular stage events during the year where days 1 and 2 were infamously not live streamed this year to the disappointment of a lot of bass fishing fans. So the entire thing was free to watch from start to finish, and the way they chose the pairs was they actually let the anglers decide. But it wasn't random, so back in May, they held a meeting where the top 24 anglers in Angler of the Year standings after Stage 4 got to select their partner in order of their AOI rank. So at that point, I think Dustin Connell was first in AOI after Stage 4, which meant he got to select first. He obviously selected his buddy Jacob Wheeler, so that is your first pair. And then they went to second place, third place, and so on. And then what you were left with is the entire BPT field divvied up into 2-man teams. Well, this was the first event of the year where those 2-man teams were being used. The regular season for Major League Fishing is over, which I've said before really is the part of the year that we care about as anglers and as bass fishing fans. That's still true, but these are kind of like more fun side tournaments to continue to give us bass fishing fans some, I think, fall content throughout the year where it doesn't just completely drop off and we have nothing through the fall and through the winter. But either way, for the 10,000th time, more fishing is a good thing to me, so I'm not here to complain about more fishing to watch. And then one of the biggest twists, as with most of the cup events that Major League Fishing does, is the anglers don't know what body of water they're fishing until the morning of competition. So when you combine all that, a secret location, 2-man teams chosen by the anglers, bracket-style competition, a fall bite, you've got a recipe for a pretty fun event to watch. So who were your teams in this event? In this event, event, you had Michael Neal and Dean Rojas. You had Mark Daniels and Adrian Avina on a team. You had Wesley Strader and Scott Suggs. Then you had Jacob Wall and Bobby Lane. You have Drew Gill and Matt Steffen, Ron Nelson and Keith Carson. You had Anthony Gagliardi and Stephen Browning. You had John Hunter and Luke Clausen, Matt Becker and Spencer Sheffield, Andy Morgan and Cole Floyd, Gerald Sporer and Nick LeBrun, and your final team, Dustin Connell and Jacob Wheeler. So with this event, we're going to do this a little bit different than normal. Usually I go through your top 10 in reverse order. Today, it's going to be top 5 because these are two-man teams. So it's still 10 anglers, but now they are in pairs. So your final results, let's start in 5th place. In 5th place, you had a tie between the team of Drew Gill and Matt Steffen and the team of Andy Morgan and Cole Floyd. In 4th place, you had Jacob Wall and Bobby Lane. 3rd place went to John Hunter and Luke Clausen. 2nd was Anthony Gagliardi and Stephen Browning. And 1st place, your B&W Trailer Hitches Team Series Challenge Cup at Lake Erie went to Matt Becker and Spencer Sheffield.
30 seconds left to a Challenge Cup championship for Team B&W Trailer Hitches.
30 seconds.
Matt Becker and Spencer Sheffield.
Whew.
Presque Isle Bay.
Man, that's so
And they
cool.
have blown the field away.
First ever two-man team. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6,
Coin
5,
lines
4,
out
3,
with your winners.
2, 1.
Team B&W Trailer Hitches.
Lines out. Congratulations, guys. We did it. Pretty good. Dude, that's a wrap. It was. Can't believe we got it done. We got her done. It was fun. Whew. Man, it's special. Have the whole crew here. Have my dad watching. Friends and family up here, sponsors. You know, Fish USA is close by. They come out and followed us around a couple days and, you know, supported the whole tournament, giving everyone a gift card and supporting the anglers. Man, it's been awesome. Erie is a special place to me. This week just added to it.
So congratulations to the Brownie Boys, as they referred to themselves throughout this event due to their affinity for zeroing in on smallmouth bass. Spencer and Matt take home $20,000 each and your first fall Team Series Cup of the year. All right, everybody, next up here, we are going to waste no time. We are getting into what I would call the main portion of today's episode, where we're going to get back to our roots here, and we are, of course, going to talk tackle today. Specifically, I want to touch on 3 specific downsized baits for fall. Now, that means no vagaries here. We are going to talk about 3 specific baits: brand, size, color, price, features, everything. 3 baits that I do not leave home without in the fall. One of these 3 is a staple of ours here on the show. One is a relatively newcomer that a friend and a listener actually introduced me to about a year and a half ago. And one is a variation of a bait that is over 100 years old and still catching fish nationwide. So let's set the stage here. We are merely 3 weeks away from the first official day of fall, which means we are waltzing right into my absolute favorite time of year to fish, at least around here in the Midwest and similar areas around the country. Fall time is truly special around here, where I personally think fish are feeding harder than any other time of the year, including spring. These fish in the fall on the right days are almost panic eating. It's like the one time a year where I will watch fish, not on live scope, not on electronics, physically with my eyeballs on top of the water looking down, actually fight over baits. You have wolf packs just viciously swarming these bait fish presentations, both subsurface and on top water. But something that's helped me a lot in the fall is listening to people who are way smarter than me tell me that in the fall, bigger baits aren't always better. Your brain might think, oh, right, fish are feeding hard, give them a big target, appeal to the bigger fish in the area, you know, that kind of like swing for the fences mentality. But actually, some of the biggest fish that I've caught in the fall have been on the most natural, accurately sized shad presentations or bait fish presentations that I can muster up. And in a lot of our water around here, those natural bait fish are still going to be in that 2.5, 3.5 inch range. And I see it in a lot of fish's throats. Yes, you're going to have bigger forage in there too, but I see a ton of that kind of pinky to ring finger length bait in their mouths and tails sticking out of their gullet. So, in fact, you don't have to take my word for it. Here is a clip from way back in the day. I think this is the first time that we actually had Jacob Wheeler on the show talking about why downsizing in the fall can make sense.
So I just it was funny because I was talking to MBJ about this. I said, listen, the falls can be very simple. You can keep it simple, but there's some nuances in the fall as well. One of the biggest thing that changes everything in the fall is small bait. So what happens typically is you have that year's hatch of small shad. So they're just got to where they're juvenile shad. They're small, and they're thread fins. They could be gizzards, but people call them, thread fins. They call them all these small little bait fish. And if the bass are really keen on them, that can be a tough bite.
So that was Jacob on our show talking about it. I also have a quote here from Dustin Elder, pro staff manager at Pradco, which will make sense here in a little bit. Unfortunately, these fish have become so keyed in on bait fish that you can't fool them with a standard plug like a Head and Super Spook or even a Super Spook Junior, Dustin notes. Instead, it's best to downsize your lures and go with something in the 3-inch range like a Super Spook Boyo, the smallest Rebel Jumpin' Minnow, or what we fish with most often, the 3-inch, 1/4-ounce Zara puppy, because it is tiny and silent. And he was obviously talking about fall time in that clip, but even in places where the fall fishing can actually suck, like down south where it's not as nice as it is up here in the north, it still pays off to downsize. I have a quote here from Tommy Biffle, who says, September is the worst month to go fishing. Unless you're up north and the water has cooled down and they're biting, it's not a good time to get up and go fish. I told someone recently that if I could figure out how to catch them consistently around here in Oklahoma this time of year, I'd win a bunch of money, because that's where all the regionals and team championships are held, where you're competing for a boat. Anytime things get tough, it always pays to downsize your bait, he says. It could be a topwater or a crankbait or a soft plastic. I fished a tournament in Grand Lake a few years ago in September, and they just come up and bump a 4.25-inch biffle bug, but I switched to the junior size, 3.25 inches, and it made all the difference in the world. So there's just a few situations where downsizing in the fall can be beneficial, where you hear it from someone else other than me. But if the bite is tough, downsizing can help. If your natural forage from that year's shad spawn is still in that 2.5 to 3.5 inch range, downsizing can help. Or if you're dealing with rapidly changing conditions, throwing those fish in a funk from day to day, downsizing can help. Now, is it always the answer? No, it's not. I've had some awesome days in the fall on like a big Alabama rig or a 7-inch glide bait too, but there are days where that 3-inch shad profile will outperform those bigger baits, no questions asked. So your next logical question should be, okay, Andrew, if I want to throw something that's downsized in the fall, what would you recommend? Well, lucky for you, I've got a few options here that we're going to talk about in detail today. The first of the three is going to be one that OG listeners of this show are going to be very familiar with, but newer listeners might not be so much, and it is a Tackle Talk staple, our little redneck creation come to life, the Jigmasters Micro Buzz. And if you know the history, I'm sorry to repeat the info here, but if you're new here, listen up, because this is important. This is one of those baits that is an absolute cheat code out there that no one talks about. It's still flying under the radar. This is a lure that I actually designed out of necessity. It's the only lure that I've ever designed, because I'm not one of those people that just wants to make things for the sake of making things and putting your name on it and selling it or whatever, things like that. That's not my MO here. Instead, if I usually have an idea, I try and pass it along to someone that I think can actually execute it better than I could if they see fit. Well, in this case, growing up here in Ohio, we stumbled on a bite a long time ago in the creeks and the rivers where we would take the smallest buzzbait that we could find. In most cases, it was something really, really small, like a Strike King, mini pro buzz or something like that. And we would rip the skirt off of it, and then we'd put a 3-inch Mr. Twister grub on the hook and throw what I affectionately refer to as a buzz grub. But the key to that bite all those years was twofold. It was size and it was speed. The size is so important because everyone everyone else is out there throwing regular sized buzz baits with big loud blades, big skirts, clackers, that heavier like 3/8 ounce profile. So a standard 3/8 ounce buzz bait from like tip to tail can be, 6 inches in length by the time everything's said and done. And that was an unnatural size to these fish around here that were keying in on bait that was half that size. So I needed something smaller, much smaller, not just like an inch or two smaller. I needed something like half the size. So there were really only like 1 or 2 options on the market at the time, and those options were made out of really flimsy wire, terrible hooks. They had a skirt attached that you had to rip off, and then it left this big kind of collar around the head that you didn't need to be there, and they just didn't last. They bent out after like 1 or 2 fish. They were junk. They were almost made for fish the size of like crappie or something than they were for full-size bass. So that was not what I wanted to throw, and I waited and waited and waited for someone to make a better option, and they didn't. And then the other issue was speed. Because those bigger buzzbaits are heavier, you have to retrieve them at a certain speed to even keep them up or near the top of the water column. So they aren't able to be slowed down as easily as I wanted to, and that was a problem because there was this creeping speed that I wanted to achieve with these baits that you just couldn't do with other buzzbaits, and that speed, again, was part of the key to that bite. So I did what most people do. I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited for years for someone to make a micro buzzbait that did what I wanted it to do, and no one did it. Like I said, the Mini Pro Buzz was the closest thing out, but it was still nowhere near what I wanted. So I finally reached out to my buddy Cody, who owns a company called Jig Masters, and I asked him to help me out. And I just wanted this bait for me. I didn't want to sell it. I didn't want to, make a big deal out of it or anything. Just selfishly, I wanted this thing for fishing. Well, after, probably a handful of iterations and designs and trial and error with different wires and head designs, length configurations, blades, things like that, we finally got it right, and the Micro Buzz was born. So the Jig Masters Micro Buzz comes in at 3 inches in length total from line tie to bottom of hook. It's 3/16 ounce in weight, and here's the big one. It's made out of 45 thou wire. So that is like going into musky wire territory versus these other micro buzz baits that not only didn't have that thick a wire, they didn't even have bass thick wire. They had like crappie thick wire. So this was a big, big improvement that I really wanted, was that really thick wire to make sure that it wasn't bending out on you, even on such a small finesse lure. It also has a 1/0 black nickel VMC hook in it. It's got no skirt. It's got a custom sled head that we designed to help this bait really rise a little bit better and stay up there at slow speeds. And then it comes with a custom screw lock bait keeper on it to keep your trailer secure no matter what trailer you're throwing on it. So a truly unique micro buzzbait to perfectly match that 3-inch target size that we're talking about in this episode, while still employing heavy-duty 45 thou wire to ensure its durability fish after fish after fish. So if we want to talk about how to throw this bait in the fall, I'm typically going to put like a 3-inch grub on the back of this thing in white or shad color. Other times of the year, I do like to lean on a black grub on the back of this thing, but not in the fall. In the fall, it's all about natural light color patterns to mimic that natural shad pattern or that natural micro or that natural small bait fish, whatever you've got in your water. Maybe it's a little bit more on like the panfish side or whatever, fine. But around here, I'm really leaning into that small silver 3-inch bait fish profile. So that's what I'm sticking with here. And if the grub isn't for you, I've had a lot of luck the past few months with like a Strike King Baby Rage Menace on the back of this thing, but I'll rig it so that the legs are vertical and in line with the hook versus the normal rigging of perpendicular with the hook. That way, when this buzzbait does tend to lean over ever so slightly, if you're working it like a normal buzzbait, and all buzzbaits do this, the legs will lean too with that bait, and it'll be in a much more natural position when they're kicking back and forth. You can also put like a small swim bait on the back of this thing. I've used 2.75-inch big Joshies or like a small little 3-inch spunk shad on the back, something like that. There are so many options as to what you can put on the back of this lure, but I like to stay natural in color, and I like to vary my speed a lot. This is a bait bait that you can do both with without switching baits. So you can burn this like a regular buzz bait, or you can keep your rod tip up and you can creep this bait so that it almost wakes the surface and you get that little tail flutter under the surface of the water. And that's how I catch the majority of my fish most of the time on a micro buzz, is that sort of ever so slowly waking action where that blade is barely breaking the surface of the water up top, but that bait keeps a much more vertical profile in the water versus coming up on its side a whole lot. Again, it takes a very slow retrieve. It takes your rod tip pointed up a lot, that kind of stuff, to make sure that you achieve that action that I was going for with this bait. But we have to include this bait in this episode because it is just a quintessential fall, small topwater waking finesse shad presentation. And you guys know I don't like to hit you guys with like the microbuzz sales pitch too much on this show because we talk about everything, and I don't want to just sit here and promote some bait that I helped make over and over and over again, week after week after week. But right now it is relevant. This is the time that I would recommend picking up a microbuzz and going out there and playing around with it. And this is one of those things that I guess if I had to be proud about something other than the show in my fishing life, it's going to be this bait. It was something that I wanted forever. It was the first bait that I ever helped design, and it came to life perfectly. And getting the pictures of you guys catching all of these fish on the microbuzzes is awesome. So you can go over to www.jigmasters.com. We have them available in both black and silver options. They only come in one size, the only size you need, 3 inches in length, 3/16 ounce in weight, and they come in at just $4.99. You can just go over to the website, click shop, click tackle, and then click Tackle Talks Picks over on the Jigmasters website. Okay, the next lure that we're going to have here, we're going to talk about today in terms of downsized fall baits, is a bait that Dave got me hip to about probably a year and a half ago. Shout out Dave. He knows I love spinner baits in the fall, and he said, dude, you got to check out this mini spinner bait that this guy is making. I think he's out of Oregon, and the company is called Battle Baits. So Dave let me see one at the Columbus Expo. Thanks again. I appreciate it. And he gave me this little mini spinner bait called the Mini Gun. And after I used it the first time, I immediately bought like 6 or 8 of them right afterwards. These things might be the most slept on little spinner bait that's out there on the market right now. They're popular with the people that know about them, but for everybody else, again, they're still very much under the radar, and they shouldn't be. So hopefully we're going to help change that a little bit today. Small company making an absolute killer mini spinner bait, the Mini Gun from Battle Baits. So this Mini Gun spinner bait is extremely compact. It comes in right at that just under 3 inches in length from line tie to the bottom of the hook. Again, a super compact, small spinner bait that really packs a punch. He makes 3 different weights and hook sizes of the spinner bait too. He's got a 1/4 ounce model that uses a 1/0 hook and 30 thou stainless steel wire. He's got a 3/8 ounce version with a 2/0 hook, still 30 thou wire, and then he's got a heavier 1/2 ounce model that's still the same size, but it's a 3/0 hook and it's 35 thou wire. So my favorite thing about this bait, besides it being a very cool, unique, small profile, is that in your hand, this bait feels overbuilt. And I mean that in the absolute best way possible. Yes, these things are going to cost you $9.99 each, but they feel every bit of that quality. The head design is ultra realistic. It's got big natural eyes, multi-tone paint jobs. The skirts are hand-tied and very, very well done with the mix of colors. The wire is thick enough to be durable, but thin enough to flex when you want it to. The swivel is super high quality that holds on that blade, and the custom ribbed number 3.5 mini willow blade is killer. So this spinner bait doesn't look like a huge, obnoxious set of 2 or 3 flashing bait fish in a school together thumping around like a lot of big spinner baits do. This looks a lot more like an upside down underspin in the water than a big spinner bait. It's got that tasteful, compact flash to it that's really hard to find in spinner baits. So in the right situation where I want some flash, I want to draw attention, but draw attention to the right size to naturally match those smaller 3-inch shad, the Mini Gun is legit. Again, $9.99 over at battlebaits.com. They're all hand handmade by a small business, so there's a lot of colors that do frequently go out of stock sometimes while he's making more, it seems like. But right now, I went on the website. There are 10 colors that are currently in stock as we're recording this episode, including Morning Dawn, Bleeding Shad, which is a great fall color, Battle Bream for you guys and gals that are more in like sunfish and bluegill territory, Red Ear Sunfish, Pro Blue Red Pearl, which is another great fall pattern that he's got, a more natural color, and an awesome gold shiner pattern too. So that's bait number 2 here, a bait that I really think is criminally slept on, that should get more attention than it does, but especially this time of year, you should have one with you. It's the Battle Baits Mini Gun Spinnerbait. Okay, and finally here, we've hit subsurface with a spinnerbait. We've hit sort of a hybrid bait in the microbuzz that can be a topwater, or it can be waked in a little stealthier approach. Let's end with a tried and true classic topwater bait that I think should be talked about more than it is. It seems that its bigger brother always gets the shine, but the little brother is the great move around here in the fall. It's the Heddon Zara Puppy. Not the Zara Spook, not a Super Spook, not even a Super Spook Boyo. This is a finesse version of a Heddon Spook that packs all of that 100 years of Heddon topwater magic into a miniature 3-inch package. So the Zara Puppy is 3 inches in length, it weighs a 1/4 ounce, and this is one of my favorite times a year to pick up a silent spook, which is another benefit of picking up a Zara Puppy. No rattles, no nothing in it, a silent mini spook. And the coolest part of the Zara Puppy is that even though it's only 3 inches, it walks like it's 5 inches in length. You would think that you'd lose some control and some consistency in a smaller size with less weight, less momentum going back and forth for that walking action, but you don't. A Zara Puppy walks effortlessly. And remember, back to what Dustin Elder said in one of the quotes we talked about to start out with, the Zara Puppy is what they fish with most often out of all the other Heddon lures in the fall because of that size and because of the lack of rattles. So consistent, downsized, silent, natural, the Heddon Zara Puppy truly packs a punch for such a little tiny spook. So there's 3 specific lures that you can consider this fall if you're looking into the possibility of downsizing your approach to more accurately match those smaller bait fish profiles and shad. And the best part, all 3 of these baits come in at under $10 each. The Jigmasters Microbuzz is $4.99. The Heddon Zara Puppy is $7.99. And the Battle Baits Minigun is $9.99. So not only stone cold killers in the fall, but affordable as well. All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first we are brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium Batteries. And not only is the mailbag powered by Dakota Lithium, but this entire podcast is powered by Dakota Lithium. My kayak motor in my Hobie Outback is powered by a Dakota Lithium. My Garmin Graph, anything that I use that's electronics on my kayak is also powered by Dakota Lithium. They're the only batteries that I trust with my precious time and my safety and my success out there on the water. That iconic blue battery with the red top, you know it from a mile away. They're just the best in the business. That's because Dakota Lithium batteries are twice the power of traditional batteries at half the weight. They charge up to 5 times faster, last up to 4 times longer, have 100% US-based customer support, and come with a whopping 11-year warranty on all of their batteries. So whether you need a 100 amp hour or a 10 amp hour, a 12 volt, 24 volt, 36 volt, whatever you need, the boys at Dakota Lithium have you covered. And because you listen to Tackle Talk, you can use the code TACKLETALK5 to save 5% off your entire purchase. That helps them know that we sent you, and it helps save you money on your next battery. Again, that's code TACKLETALK5 over at www.dakotalithium.com, the official lithium battery of Bassmaster. All right, everybody, we have reached our favorite time of the week here. Let's jump into the mailbag powered by Dakota Lithium.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast Mailbag, powered by Dakota Lithium Batteries. Adventure awaits at dakotalithim.com.
All right, the first question is from Christo Van Oswegen. I hope I said that right. Christo Van Oswegen. Hi, I'm a regular listener from Zambia. I don't know how many international questions you've answered, but this should be relatively global. While I don't really fish for bass, a lot of the techniques that you and your guests discuss are universally relevant. I've listened to all of the topwater content that I could find. Through the knowledge you've shared, I've managed to catch 2 tigerfish on saltwater topwater poppers from a South African company called Fish Inc. The specific popper is called the Fly Half. It is 80 millimeters in length and the color is called bronze sardine. Please have a look at their products. I'm not sponsored or affiliated with them, but good companies deserve a shout out. I've also caught lots of nembwe. I think I probably said that wrong too. Sorry, I'm not obviously the best at pronunciations. Everybody that listens to the show knows that. But nembwe is what he said, the name of that fish. I'll have to look that up later. It's a fish that's sort of like a tilapia or bream that are very strong fighters for their size. All from techniques and lures discussed on your podcast. Now that I've done with the storytelling, here's my question. Do you believe that performance-enhancing drugs can give one a competitive advantage in bass fishing? Is this something that has been mentioned and should pros be tested? The reason for my question is that I believe 3 or 4 day tournaments are gruesome on one's mental and physical game, and a lot of it ends up coming down to concentration and endurance, especially when fishing against pros who are very similar skilled and experienced. Just a question I wanted to throw out there. Greetings from sunny Africa. Please come visit and fish the beautiful waters here. Tiger fishing wrangling regards, Christo. Man, that is too cool. Thanks, Christo. I appreciate that. That is awesome. A submission all the way from Zambia. I'm not going to lie to you. When this question came through and all of this information, I had to type a lot of this into Google before responding to this. First off, where is Zambia? I knew it was in Africa somewhere, but I had no idea where. So it looks like, are right next to like Zimbabwe, Botswana. You're down like in southern Africa. So it never ceases to amaze me, I guess, a side tangent here, on how cool the world is that we live in, where a random guy in Ohio in the United States can talk into a microphone, post it, and then someone halfway around the world, literally halfway around the world, I looked it up, 7,886 miles away, can listen each and every week and be a part of this show. That is so darn cool. So I appreciate you writing in. I think the last time I looked at our stats, it was something like 60 plus countries with regular listeners. There were like 100 that was just, had been listened in, but I'm feeling like most of those that had like 1, 2, 3, 4 people in them, probably like people with VPNs that are just hiding their location, but 60 plus countries with regular listeners in them. That's pretty darn cool. So thank you so much for writing in. It's awesome to hear from one of you. And then I did have to look up the popper that you were talking about because I'm just a curious individual and wanted to look at them. The poppers look pretty cool. They're again from a company called Fish Inc. And the one you mentioned was that Fly Half. And then because you're in another country other than America, it means you use the metric system. So when you said this popper is 80 millimeters or whatever it was, I had to look that up too and convert it. Same thing with the weight. On the website, it says they're 16 grams. So I ran the conversions. It looks like it's 3.14 inches in length and 0.56 ounces. So for round numbers, we're talking like 3 inches and half an ounce. And that is a great mid-sized popper. Now, they do look a little bit more saltwater oriented to me, just based on the hardware and kind of how they look. But man, that 441 tidal form is what the color was called. Looks pretty darn sweet for bass too. So thanks for mentioning those. I always enjoy kind of checking out new stuff that I've never heard of before. But to your question, do I believe that performance-enhancing drugs could be used in fishing? That, my friend, is a question I have never, ever been asked before. So kudos to you on that one. Before I give my knee-jerk reaction, I guess I want to think about this. Is there a world where PEDs can help an angler? I honestly don't think so, other than just the stamina of physically standing and casting, which are not strenuous activities for anybody that is even remotely in any bit of decent shape. There's not really a whole lot of extra physicality that you can gain that can help you in fishing. I mean, look at someone like Taku Ito. I love Taku. Taku is one of the best anglers in the country, but he's a very small guy. Even had a hard time lifting up the trophy that he won in the Bassmaster Elite Series the first time he won an event. So strength doesn't really help you too much. And then on the flip side, you've got quite a few anglers on tour that are either, in their elderly years or they're not really in peak physical form, to say the least, for some folks that are, again, still in that top echelon of professional fishing. You just have so many different body types and strengths and things like that. I mean, look at someone like Shane LaHue, who is 5'9", 145 pounds soaking wet. And then you've got someone like Frank Talley, who's 6'1", 275, and they're both on an even playing field. That's why looking at fishing as a true sport in general is a little tricky, and I'm not going to get into that today, but the physicality has very little to do with your success on the water water versus other anglers. You just have to have the stamina to stand and cast all day. That's about it. So I'm going to say no here. I don't think there's any performance enhancing drugs that could help someone in professional fishing. I think it's more about gear. It's more about sonar technology, boat technology, and speed advancements and spot locking and all that kind of stuff that helps tremendously and has kind of changed the game for professional fishing. Physical fitness is not going to win you events. I don't think even mental stimulants would be a big help there either. You are at the mercy of another living thing. So the outcome is not totally in your control. There are just too many variables to something like fishing to say that a PED would give you an advantage. So good question. That's a fun one to kind of think about. Thanks for writing in. Appreciate it, Christo. Next question is from Jimmy Bags, and he says, "Hi, Andrew. I was listening to your River Tackle Box podcast and was wondering why you use a spinning rod in the river when wading as opposed to a bait caster. I've learned a ton from your podcast, so thank you, Jimmy." Hey, Jimmy. Yeah, good question. I always wade with a spinning rod because it's the most versatile option in regards to the types of techniques that I'm likely to employ when I'm wading. So when I'm wading, that means the water is probably going to be relatively shallow because it has to be shallow enough for me to navigate it while I'm wading. So I'm fishing relatively shallow water systems, and that means I'm throwing a lot of finesse. I'm throwing a lot of bouncing back and forth between top water and bottom baits. But my bottom baits are more like dragon Ned rigs or really small finesse swim bait heads or grubs, things like that, versus, a big half-ounce football jig, a giant Texas rig with, a half-ounce flipping weight on it, a Carolina rig, things that would require me to use a bait caster. I'm not throwing those when I'm wading. Most of the time when I'm wading, I'm throwing something relatively small to medium size, so that leans me more toward a spinning rod. But then topwaters are the same way. When I'm throwing topwaters, I'm throwing regular size poppers, small spooks, choppos, the micro buzz, things like that. I'm hardly ever going to be wading and want to throw like a frog in slop or something like that, which again would require a bait caster. So I throw a lot of baits that can be thrown on either one, a spinning rod or a bait caster, but then I also throw a lot of baits that should be thrown on a spinning rod and almost no baits that should be thrown on a bait casting rod. So given the choice, the spinning rod covers more of my usual wading techniques than a casting rod does. And when I'm wading, I'm only bringing one rod, so spinning it is. Now, that's not to say again that you can't wade with a casting rod. You certainly can, but I think that limits me more than it would help me. Now, this is the one time that I might say, if you want best of both worlds, you might want to look into something like a BFS setup. That's something that, again, can handle those smaller baits, still gives you a casting profile to your combo. But not necessarily my cup of tea. I'm not a big BFS guy. You guys know that. I'd much rather use a traditional spinning rod when I'm out there targeting those fish in a wading scenario. All right, the next question is from Kevin Youngblood, and he says, "Professional fishing is over for the year? What the heck are you talking about? Did you forget about those 12 anglers, some of the best in the world, participating in the team series? It can be watched on the same website that you watch the Bass Pro Tour events on. Even better format than last year, and it's just starting in September and goes through Friday of this week, depending on how soon you check this. Sorry to bust your," and then he puts in a term for male anatomy here. This is a family show. And then he says, "I consider this to be the best part of the professional fishing season. Love your show. Keep up the great work. You are the highlight of my Tuesday, Kevin." Well, Kevin, I guess I'll say it's my turn to bust yours for a second. There were 24 anglers in this past week's team series event, not 12. But yeah, sorry, you're right. By letter of the law, pro fishing is not over for the season. But if we're going to be honest with ourselves, the majority of us, now it sounds like you might be in the minority, that's fine. Most of us, the fishing that we actually care about is over. The regular traditional tournaments, they are over. Now, again, there are some tournaments still coming up that give us some additional content, but you can even see it in the payouts that these are not on the same level as the regular season tournaments. I mean, for a stage victory on Major League Fishing, the winner wins $100,000. The payout for the team tournament that we just saw was $40,000, and that has to get split between two anglers. So each angler only gets $20,000 if they win that cup event. So there's a reason that it's 1/5 of the prize money versus a regular season event. There's also a reason that it doesn't count toward Angler of the Year standings, which has already been awarded. There's even a reason reason why there's no impact on like who makes Red Crest next year. These are more like fun side tournaments, not the main thing. But I hear you. There is still fishing to watch. Obviously, we already covered it in the beginning of this episode. But yeah, sorry, your question comes after we've already covered it. I guess it might have made more sense if it came before. So sorry I didn't get to this question last week. But yeah, rest assured, we will still, in passing, mention some of these events that happen throughout the offseason. Okay, next question is from Matthew Forsyth. And he says, "Hello, Andrew. Thanks for all you do with the podcast. I started listening several months ago and have basically gone through the whole library of episodes over the past few months. My question might be a little different than normal ones, but here is some background. I'm a dad of 3 boys aged 8, 7, and 2. My 2 older boys recently took an interest in fishing over the last year. I say this painfully as I write this question to you, but I was not a fisherman. So I have tried to level up to support their interest this year. We started with just a float, a hook, and a worm fishing local stock ponds, and then graduated to some ultralight pan fishing in the creeks. However, I think we would like to start moving towards some bass fishing. Now, a boat or a kayak is not coming down the driveway anytime soon, so we'll be mostly bank fishing. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, so we do have some stellar rivers and creeks close to the house. I've accumulated some gear already, but wanted to ask you about lure types and presentations. If you were in my situation, what lure types or presentations would you start to focus on? Would you pick maybe something like spinnerbaits and buzzbaits and learn to fish them first, or would you go with something like bottom baits like jigs and Texas rigs? Basically, where would you start for something easy that both myself and my kids could learn? When I listen to the podcast or watch videos, I often don't know what is the kind of bread and butter lures to start with and how to fish them. Thanks." Hey, Matthew, thanks for the question. These are honestly like some of my favorite situations because there's absolutely nothing better than fishing being the activity that creates true, lasting family time between parents and kids. Even cooler that you were not a fisherman, but you saw your kids liked it and you want to get into it too. That is awesome. That's like pull at the heartstrings type stuff. And nowadays, where like everything is on a phone, everything's digital, video games, social media, all that kind of stuff, just getting out with your kids for a few hours and doing something out in nature together, these are the memories they're going to stick with your kids like the rest of their life. They're not going to remember the 17 Instagram reels that they saw 40 years ago, but they're going to remember the times that dad took them out fishing. So that is awesome in and of itself, item number 1. Now, you said you're looking for starter lures for both you and your kids. You named a few of them, which are great, but I would go with any of them that are more of like cast and retrieve type baits first, and then go to something that takes a little bit more skill to feel the bite and set the hook like bottom baits. So I'm a big fan of reaction baits first when you're learning, then bottom baits later down the road. So I'd start with something like spinner baits. I think that's a good suggestion from you. You could also go with something like a buzz bait, or you could even do poppers, because there's not really too many right or wrong ways to work a popper as long as you're working it so that it's moving and spitting some water out. So I'd start with that. You could also start with crankbaits. If you're in a place that isn't too weedy and snaggy and it's a little bit more rocky, then those will work great too. But I've said it before, I'll say it again, the number one lure to get people away from bobbers and worms and start fishing with artificial lures is an inline spinner, like a Mepps or a rooster tail or a panther martin, something where you can cast and reel and they catch everything under the sun. They're cheap, they're effective, they're easy to work, and they work on all species. So inline spinners would be my easy number 1 recommendation there. And then once you start getting the hang of moving baits and more chuck and wind baits, then you can start to get into baits that have a little bit more nuance to them. So going from a popper to a spook is a good example. For instance, a popper, you just kind of work it and you pull it and chug it or whatever, do whatever you want. A spook, there's a little bit more cadence to it to get it to go walk back and forth, bam, 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 right? That type of thing for it to zigzag and do that walk the dog motion. You could go from something like a spinnerbait, which again is cast and wind, to more of a jerkbait, where again, there is that cadence to it. You're getting it to kind of work back and forth and dart and stop. So there's a little bit more to that bait. This is also a great time to start working in bottom baits once you get the hang of some of those moving baits. So wacky rigs are a great first place to start when you actually want to go with like finesse or sort of subsurface lures, because they don't always go all the way to the bottom. They kind of hang out in the middle of the water column a lot of times, and they have an exposed hook. So the fish a lot of times will help hook themselves versus you having to give them a big give them the beans hook set. But then once you do that, you can graduate to Texas rigs, traditional jigs that do take a little bit more oomph to set the hook. So that would be my recommendation on that. Best of luck to all four of you. Super cool that you're getting into fishing for your kids. Okay, next question here is from John Van Renz, and he says, "Hi, Andrew. Love the podcast. As a fellow Midwesterner in Wisconsin, I wanted to inquire about fall bass fishing attire. What is your preferred way to stay warm and safe while kayaking in the fall? I bought my first kayak this summer, and I'm not sure how to dress for the dropping temperatures. Thanks, John." That's a good one too. Okay, I'll start with, I'm ashamed to admit that this took me way longer to learn than it should have, but my buddy Ryan taught me a few years back, the most important thing you can do when you're trying to stay warm in the fall or the winter is a good base layer. And that base layer is something that, again, I'm a very frugal guy, so I hate spending, a lot of money on things that I can find cheaper other places. Your base layer is something worth spending more money on. I would rather have one good base layer set than like 3 or 4 cheap ones. So your base layer is going to be more of almost like a spandexy material. It's stretchy, it's more form-fitting, almost like skin tight, and that goes on first before anything else. And you can find cheap base layers at stores for $20-$30 or whatever. They don't work that well. I've never found a cheap set that does what I want it to do. So I finally sacked up and I bought an Under Armour base layer set last year, and it's been night and day difference out there when it's cold. Now, you don't have to buy Under Armour. I'm not here to tell you what brand that you have to buy. I don't have any sort of deal with, obviously, Under Armour or anything. In fact, I think there are probably better options out there at a better price, but that's what I ended up going with. I think it's called their Cold Gear, if I remember right. I think the tops were like $50, the bottoms were like $50, so all in, you're looking at about $100 for a set, but it was well worth it. That gave me that great warm base layer to start out with, and then in the mid-fall to late fall, that could be all you need. That and then just your regular clothes on the outside of that, and you're plenty warm. But then once you start to get into this like late fall, early winter where it starts getting real cold, then that base layer makes even more of a difference, especially when you're talking about before you had this nice base layer having to add 4, 5, 6 different layers to stay warm out there. Now you can have that base layer on. You can do maybe like a long sleeve shirt and then your hoodie and then your outer shell, and you're totally fine even in like the nastiest conditions. When I go out ice fishing, it's like whatever, -10 degrees out, the wind's blowing. All I have is that Under Armour Cold Gear on first. I again might put on a long sleeve shirt, I might not. I'll put on a hoodie, and then I'll put on my Striker ice suit. And I am as toasty as can be in any conditions that Ohio can throw at me. No heating packs, no nothing, just because I have a high quality base layer and a high quality outer layer. Those are the two things that seem to make the biggest difference for me. So in your case specifically, John, in the fall, I would say buy a really nice base layer set and you should be much warmer, and then the rest of it until you get into the really cold winter is not going to be as big of a deal. Base layer is the biggest game changer that I've found in terms of keeping myself warm in any conditions. Okay, and the last question here is from Grant Kempf, and he says, "Hey Andrew, I want to start out by saying I started listening to your podcast somewhat recently, and it's quickly become one of my favorites. I recently just moved back down to college in Southwest Ohio, and I've started fishing the rivers around my school quite a bit. During the spring, I was catching smallmouth like crazy no matter what I threw. So now that I moved back into school, I decided to go fish after not fishing the rivers all summer, and to my surprise, I didn't catch a single fish after hours of fishing. My question is, where do these fish on these bigger river systems move throughout the summer months, and what should I be throwing to try and catch them? I fished the areas where the river had a bend that created a deeper hole, but it seemed like the only active fish there were carp and gar. Thanks." Hey Grant, so what you're describing is something that I've dealt with firsthand for years and years, ever since I was little. In smaller rivers and creeks, those fish move throughout the seasons. And around here, one of the main reasons those fish move in the summertime specifically is because of the threat of low water conditions. If those fish don't get out of there before it's too late, they can get stuck in these sections of river or small creek that almost completely like dry up, and they either die or they're stranded in some small deep hole without much forage to eat. So that means the mature fish that have lived for years and years and years have adapted. They know that at certain points of the year, whether it's, water temperature, whether it's water level, that they better not get stuck in those shallow areas and they better move to deeper water. So in your case, an area that produced really well in the spring might have a completely different water level or forage base in the spring than in the summer. So spots that are good in the spring and in the fall, not necessarily good summer spots. So you might have just found one of those areas areas in those type of spots where those fish move out because of the threat of low water. If the level and the forage isn't an issue and you think it looks just as good as it did, it's not like, super clear and super shallow and you're afraid they might have like limited options to eat or to hunt, then they might have just simply moved to deeper water for better protection or cooler water temps, or maybe something like more oxygenated water. If that's the case, they could move toward moving water. They might move toward a drainage pipe or a dam or something like that. You'll find a lot of fish, when the fishing gets tough, move toward that highly oxygenated water versus that stagnant water in the summertime. The last thing I'll say is that in the summer, those fish behave more drastically at dawn and dusk. In the summertime especially, those fish just flip a switch at dawn and dusk unlike any other time of the year. There is a bigger difference in activity level between dawn and dusk and midday than any other season. So that means that might be the issue too. Maybe you're just going out in the middle of the day and maybe those fish are not up for it. So try early morning, try right at sunset and see if that changes. Even if those fish are tucked to structure or they're not wanting to play, they're being real shy, maybe the water's too clear in the summer, things like that. I've seen all kinds of weird stuff. At dusk and at dawn are going to be your best time for those fish to get a little bit more confident, leave their little hiding space and go out there and feed. So if you're still not having any luck right at dawn and right at dusk, then it just might be time to go find a new stretch of river. And if that's the case, the one thing that I would say is try moving toward whatever the next biggest water system is. So if it is a creek that dumps into a big river, well then okay, go toward the mouth. Go toward where that creek dumps into that big river. Maybe those fish slide out into the main river versus getting stuck up in that small creek. Or the flip side, maybe this river gets dumped into from a spillway from a big local lake. Well, okay, go toward the spillway, go toward the big lake and see if you can find those fish that direction too. That would be my recommendation. If you're not having luck at dusk and at dawn and you're not seeing any sort of issues, like the water is obviously lower than it was when you were there in the spring, that the water's clearer than when you were there in the spring, maybe it's a little bit more stagnant, those are all reasons why fish could move out into a different location. All right, everybody, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate all of you. Go find us on the web, tackletalkpodcast.com. There you can check out our store. We still have a couple Give 'em the Bean shirts left in certain sizes. We have custom Arctic tumblers, we have hats, we have decals, all kinds of stuff over on the website. Go find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Tackle Talk Podcast. And we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.